Somewhere, right now, someone is typing out a long message explaining why they didn't show up, why they made a decision, why they chose the path they chose, to someone who was never going to accept the answer anyway. They'll hit send, feel a small wave of relief, and then spend the rest of the night refreshing their phone, waiting for a reply that either won't come or will come loaded with more questions, more doubt, more demand for justification. Here's what nobody tells you about explaining yourself. It rarely buys you peace. It usually buys you an interrogation. There's a strange, quiet rule that almost every genuinely confident, respected, and mentally strong person seems to follow, whether they learned it from philosophy or just years of hard experience. There are certain things in life you simply stop explaining, not because you're hiding something, not because you're arrogant, but because you've finally understood that explanation, in these 5 specific situations, doesn't protect you. It exposes you. Today we're going through 5 things you should never explain to anyone again, and by the end of this video, you're going to recognize, probably uncomfortably, how many times you've handed your power away in exactly this manner, to exactly the wrong people. This isn't about becoming secretive or cold. It's about understanding a distinction almost nobody teaches you, the difference between honesty, which strengthens your relationships, and over-explanation, which quietly destroys your peace. Let's get into it. Why we over-explain in the first place. Before we get into the 5 things themselves, it's worth understanding why we do this at all, because the habit runs deeper than most people realize. Over-explaining is, at its core, an attempt to control how someone else perceives you. It comes from a very human, very understandable fear, the fear of being misunderstood, judged, or thought less of. So we pile on detail after detail, reason after reason, hoping that if we just explain thoroughly enough, the other person will finally understand, finally approve, finally stop looking at us with that expression of doubt. The problem is that this almost never works the way we hope. Explanation, when given to someone who has already decided how they feel about you, doesn't change their mind. It just gives them more material to pick apart. Every additional detail you offer becomes another thread they can pull on, another inconsistency they can point to, another reason to keep the conversation going instead of letting it end. There's also a deeper cost that's easy to miss. Every time you over-explain something that didn't need explaining, you are quietly communicating to yourself and to the other person that your actions require external permission. You are treating your own choices as things that need to be justified before they can be considered valid. Do that enough times, in enough situations, and you slowly train yourself to seek approval before you can even feel settled in your own decisions. The 5 things we're about to cover are the areas where this pattern does the most damage, and where letting go of the need to explain creates the most immediate, noticeable shift in how people treat you. Thing 1. Your financial decisions. The first thing you should stop explaining is how you spend, save, or manage your money. This might sound obvious when stated plainly, but think about how often it actually happens. Someone asks why you didn't come to a trip because it was too expensive, and instead of simply saying, "It's not in my budget right now," people launch into a full accounting of their financial situation. Their bills, their savings goals, their recent expenses, sometimes even their income. Someone comments on a purchase you made, and instead of just enjoying it, you find yourself justifying the price, explaining that you saved for months, that it was a special occasion, that you don't usually spend like this. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Nobody who is genuinely well-intentioned needs a financial breakdown from you to respect your choices. And the people who do push for that level of detail are almost never doing it out of concern. They're doing it because your financial decisions have somehow become a topic they feel entitled to have an opinion on. Money carries an enormous amount of social weight, and that's exactly why explaining it in detail is so dangerous. The moment you open up the specifics of your financial situation to someone, you give them a permanent reference point to judge every future decision against. Bought something new? They'll remember what you told them about your savings and question it. Said no to lending money? They'll bring up that one time you mentioned a bonus. The information never goes away, and it never stops being used as leverage, whether consciously or not. What you can say instead is simple. And it doesn't require a single number. That doesn't work for my budget right now. I've got other priorities for my money at the moment. I appreciate the offer, but I'll pass this time. None of these statements owe anyone the actual figures behind them. Your bank balance is not public information, and you are never required to make a case for why you're allowed to manage your own resources the way you see fit. This becomes even more important with family, because family members often feel a unique entitlement to your financial details, wrapped in the language of concern. "I'm just worried about you," can be genuine, but it can also be a soft entry point into a conversation that ends with unsolicited advice, guilt, or pressure about decisions that were never theirs to weigh in on. You can appreciate someone's concern without opening your financial life up for review. "I've got it handled, but thank you for checking in," closes that door respectfully, without an inch of unnecessary detail. Thing 2. Why you ended a relationship or friendship. The second thing you should stop explaining is the specific reasoning behind why you distanced yourself from someone, ended a friendship, or walked away from a relationship. This one runs deep, because ending a connection with someone almost always comes with an unspoken social expectation that you owe the people around you, mutual friends, family, sometimes even the person themselves, a full account of what went wrong. And so we give it. We explain the arguments, the disappointments, the specific incidents, hoping that a detailed enough account will make people understand why we made the choice we made. But here's what actually tends to happen. The more detail you give, the more room you create for other people to relitigate a decision that was never theirs to make in the first place. They'll offer their perspective on the situation, they'll suggest you overreacted, or that you should give the person another chance, or that it doesn't sound that bad. Suddenly, a decision you made with a clear head, based on your own lived experience of that relationship, is being debated by people who weren't there for 90% of what actually happened. There's also a particular kind of damage that comes from over-explaining why you ended things with someone. Specifically, it often requires you to relive and narrate painful details repeatedly, to multiple people, each time reopening a wound you were actively trying to close. Every retelling keeps you tethered to the conflict a little longer than you need to be. You are allowed to say simply, "It wasn't working for me anymore," or "We wanted different things," or even just, "I needed space from that relationship," without providing a courtroom-level account of every specific grievance. If someone pushes further, a simple, "I'd rather not go into the details, but I've made peace with the decision," is a complete sentence. It doesn't need a follow-up. It doesn't need evidence. Your relationships and your reasons for stepping away from them are yours to hold, not yours to defend in front of a jury of mutual acquaintances. This is especially important to remember with family members who may have loved the other person too, or who may feel loyalty pulled in two directions. Their discomfort with not having the full story is not your responsibility to resolve by handing over every detail of your private pain. Thing 3. Your career or life timeline. The third thing you should stop explaining is why your life doesn't look the way other people expected it to by a certain age. Your career path, your relationship status, whether or not you have children, where you're living, what you're doing with your life. This is one of the most exhausting forms of over-explanation, because it's rarely triggered by a single conversation. It's a drip-feed pressure that shows up at family gatherings, in casual catch-ups with old classmates, in offhand comments from relatives who haven't seen you in a year and feel entitled to a full life audit in the span of a 5-minute conversation. And the instinct, when faced with, "So when are you getting married?" or "Still not settled down in a stable job yet," or "Don't you think it's time you had kids?" is to explain, to justify the unconventional path, to list the reasons, the circumstances, the timeline, the plan you have in your head that nobody asked to see. Here's the problem. These questions are almost never actually seeking information. They're social scripts, a way people fill conversational space, often without any real investment in your answer. Answering them with a detailed, defensive explanation signals that you feel your life needs to be justified against some external timeline, and it invites exactly the kind of follow-up questions and unsolicited opinions you were hoping to avoid by explaining in the first place. A far more powerful response is brevity paired with warmth. I'm exactly where I want to be right now. Things are unfolding at their own pace, and I'm happy with that. I'll let you know if that changes. These responses don't invite debate because they don't offer any material to debate. They simply close the loop and move the conversation forward. This matters because your life's timeline, when you achieve what, in what order, on whose schedule, is one of the most deeply personal things about you, and yet it's one of the things people feel most entitled to comment on. The moment you stop treating that timeline as something that requires public justification, you take back an enormous amount of quiet control over your own life narrative. Thing 4. Why you said no. The fourth thing you should stop explaining is the reasoning behind a simple no. This might be the single most common form of over-explanation, because saying no, without a lengthy justification attached, still feels deeply uncomfortable for most people. We're taught, in subtle ways throughout our lives, that a plain no is somehow rude or insufficient, and that we owe people a full paragraph of reasons before we're allowed to decline anything: an invitation, a request, a favor, an opportunity. So instead of simply saying, "I can't make it," we explain the prior commitment, the traffic, the tiredness, the schedule conflict, sometimes even fabricating more elaborate excuses than the situation calls for, purely because a plain no feels too exposed. Here's what's worth understanding. Every reason you give is a potential entry point for negotiation. "I'm busy that day" invites, "What if we moved it?" "I don't have the energy" invites, "It'll be low-key, I promise." The more detailed your explanation, the more surface area you create for someone to argue against each individual point, piece by piece, until your no has been slowly negotiated into a reluctant yes. A complete, powerful sentence you can use starting today is simply, "I can't make that work." No further clause required. If the relationship matters to you and you want to soften it, you can add warmth without adding justification. "I can't make that work, but I hope it goes well," or "That's not something I can commit to right now, but thank you for thinking of me." Notice that neither of these requires a single reason. This is not about being blunt or dismissive with people you care about. It's about recognizing that no is already a complete answer, and that the compulsion to pad it with justification usually comes from a fear of disappointing someone, not from an actual social requirement to provide evidence for your own boundaries. Thing 5. Your past mistakes and struggles. The fifth and final thing you should stop explaining, at least to people who haven't earned that level of access, is the full context and detail behind your past mistakes, failures, or struggles. There's a particular kind of vulnerability that comes with having made a visible mistake: a failed business, a public setback, a difficult period in your life that people caught glimpses of. And there's an intense pressure, especially in a world of social comparison, to offer up a detailed, redemptive explanation anytime the topic comes up, as if you need to prove you've processed it correctly, learned the right lessons, and emerged appropriately transformed. But your struggles are not a performance that requires an audience's approval of your narrative arc. You do not owe casual acquaintances, distant relatives, or curious coworkers a full account of what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how you've grown from it. That level of access is something you choose to give to people who have earned your trust, not something owed simply because someone asked, or because the topic came up in conversation. Over-explaining your past mistakes to people who haven't earned that access does something quietly damaging. It keeps you narrating your lowest moments on demand, for an audience that often has no real stake in your growth, and sometimes, uncomfortably, seems more interested in the details of your struggle than in your recovery from it. A simple, dignified response to questions that probe too deeply into a difficult chapter of your life might be, "That was a hard period, but I've moved past it. I learned a lot from that time, and I'd rather focus on where I am now." These responses acknowledge the past honestly, without opening the door to a full retelling every single time the subject surfaces. This doesn't mean you should never talk about your struggles. Some of the most valuable conversations happen when we do share these things, openly and vulnerably, with people who deserve that depth. The distinction is intention and audience. Sharing your story with someone who has earned trust and genuinely cares is connection. Explaining your story to someone who is simply curious, or worse, judgmental, on demand, every time it comes up, is exhausting self-exposure with no real return. Putting this into practice, here's the thread that runs through all 5 of these. In every case, the instinct to over-explain comes from the same place, a belief, often unconscious, that your choices are not valid until someone else approves of the reasoning behind them. The moment you start practicing brief, complete answers instead of long justifications, something interesting happens. Most people simply accept it and move on. They were never actually invested in a detailed explanation in the first place. They were just following the social script of asking. The ones who push back, who demand more detail after you've already given a complete, polite answer, are almost always revealing something about their own need for control, not a legitimate gap in your explanation. This isn't about becoming distant, secretive, or hard to talk to. The people who have genuinely earned your trust and your time still deserve depth, honesty, and real conversation. This is specifically about recognizing the difference between people and moments that deserve your full context, and the far larger number of situations where a short, honest, complete answer is not just acceptable, it's actually the stronger, more self-respecting choice. Next time you feel that familiar urge rising, to explain the money, to justify the breakup, to defend your timeline, to pad your no, to narrate your past, pause for 1 second and ask yourself, does this person need this information to understand me, or am I just trying to earn their approval? Once you can answer that question honestly, you'll know exactly how much or how little you actually need to say. You are not required to make a case for your own life, not for your money, not for your relationships, not for your timeline, not for your boundaries, and not for your past. The people worth keeping close will respect a short, honest answer. The people who won't were never going to be satisfied by a longer one anyway. Practice this over the next week. The next time you feel that pull to explain something you don't actually owe anyone, try saying less instead, and notice how much lighter it feels to let your answer simply be enough. If this video helped you see something in a new way, subscribe to Mind and Method, because next week we're covering the flip side of this conversation, the handful of things you should always be honest about, no matter how uncomfortable, and why that honesty matters even more once you've stopped over-explaining everything else. Until then, say what's true, keep it short, and let that be enough.